Welcome to this very special edition of Faces of Faith. Over the last year and a half or so, we have taken the time every once in a while in these online services to have a conversation with a member of our congregation and just find out more about their journey of life and faith and ways that they're involved in the church. Today gives us a very, very special opportunity. As I mentioned earlier in this service, we were all thrilled to hear the news that the National Office of the Presbyterian Church, the General Assembly Office, has announced that the Reverend Dr. Robert Faris will be the moderator of the 2022 General Assembly and will serve in that capacity through until the General Assembly in 2023. Now, the Reverend Dr. Robert Faris is better known around here by the name of Bob, and it is wonderful to celebrate this important appointment with him. And we thought it might be interesting today to have a conversation to find out a little bit more about what the role of a moderator is and does, what types of things are going to be confronting the General Assembly this year, but also within the context of Bob's own life and faith and ministry. So we hope that you enjoy this conversation together. So first of all, Bob, on behalf of all of us, congratulations. We're absolutely thrilled to hear about this news. We knew that it was a possibility, but to hear the confirmation this week was truly wonderful to find out. So I'm going to maybe just start with a couple of questions about the moderator's role, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your life and faith, and then what the General Assembly is going to look like. So first of all, what is a moderator?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Will, and thanks for your words, and I appreciate all the notes of congratulations and support that I've been receiving from people from St. Andrews and elsewhere. So the moderator is very much a part of the Presbyterian system of governance. We have what are called courts, which is kind of an odd name actually, but we do have courts, and it's a series of courts that range from the session at the local level to presbyteries and synods and the General Assembly, which is the national gathering of the representatives of the church. So every one of those courts has a moderator. It's like a chairperson. It's perhaps a little more than that, but it's a person who's named to conduct the meeting, to make sure that things are done decently and in order, as Presbyterians like to say, and so that everyone has a chance to speak, and so that the conversation is held in a way that doesn't personalize things too much and avoids some personal attacks. So people speak through the moderator. If you think of the parliamentary system in Canada's parliament or the legislatures, there's always a speaker. And in some ways, the moderator is kind of like the speaker in a legislature. So the individual members of the court will speak to the moderator rather than to another person. And so in the assembly, that's the role that the moderator plays. And then we'll call for the votes and ensure that those are taken properly, and works very closely with the clerk. And again, in every court, there's a clerk who is the person who is supposed to be the expert on the Book of Forms, the kind of laws and regulations and whatever of the church, and to make sure that that's done in the way that it's supposed to be done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So before we get more into the General Assembly itself and the kind of things that you're going to have to be confronting and leading us through in the next year, tell us a little bit about your own life and your own sort of journey of faith. What's brought you to this moment?
Right. Well, I've had a varied life, I'll say, and not necessarily if there ever is a usual route in ministry, but I've done a number of different things and been involved in different ministries over the course of my life, and I'm grateful for that. Very grateful for that opportunity. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church in Newmarket, and then our family moved to Sarnia. And I was part of what was called and still is called the Presbyterian Young People Society. I say was because I'm not a young person anymore, but it still exists, and was very involved in that and in church camping at Camp Kintail, and in the PYPS in southwestern Ontario. And that really influenced my life a great deal and my decision to go into ministry, and certainly recognized leadership skills and gifts when I was a part of PYPS. And that was recognized by my peers as well. And made that decision when I was in university to follow a call to ordained ministry within the Presbyterian Church. You have to do quite a bit of study to be a minister. So I did my undergrad work at Queen's and Kingston, and then I did 1 year in Scotland at New College, and came back to Canada, spent a year in a mission placement in Hamilton, in inner city mission, and then 2 more years at Knox College and graduated. And I was ordained in 1984. And that was kind of a unique thing as well, because I was ordained, the first person to be ordained to full-time camping ministry at Camp Kintail. And I was delighted with that, and was able to really develop the camp and to put in place some of the long-term planning that's led to some of the great developments at Kintail recently, I'm happy to say. And also to just be involved in that part of the church's life, which is so important to so many young people, and provides a space where churches seems to be, I think, more relevant, more personal, more engaging than maybe the local congregation for some folks, and also is a place where many of the ministers and other leaders in the church have learned their leadership skills and learned what it means to be in community. So I was thrilled to be part of that ministry. I went back then to Scotland in 1986, and I had what was called the traveling scholarship from Knox College. So it had to be used within a certain length of time, and I did an MTH there in Christian ethics and practical theology was the department, and studied with someone called Duncan Forrester, who was very influential in my life and in my thinking. And that experience, along with a grounding in my own family and church in thinking about mission, and particularly global mission, led me to seek and find a calling and an appointment to the Presbyterian Church of Mozambique, where I taught in an ecumenical seminary for 6 years in a country that was very much influenced by all of the happenings in Southern Africa, and particularly the apartheid system in South Africa. So it was in the midst of a civil war when I went there in 1989. And I stayed until 1994 when the war ended. There was a peace accord, and the first multi-party elections were held. And again, that was very formative for me in how I understand the church and the church in the world, and our relationship with partners around the world. I came back to Canada to work with an ecumenical organization in Canada called the Canadian Churches Forum for Global Ministries, that I had been part of their programs in going to Mozambique, and it did programs of orientation for people going overseas, and also what was it called? Re-entry programs for people coming back into what was supposed to be our own culture, but looked very different after those kinds of experiences. And I spent quite a number of years with the forum, and had wonderful opportunities there to meet with all kinds of people who were involved in global mission and ministry, from many different Canadian churches and also connections with churches in the United States as well. And in the midst of my time there, I started work on a PhD through the University of Cape Town, which drew on my experiences in Mozambique, and was kind of back and forth between working and studying and trying to find the time to do the research that was necessary for the doctoral studies. And just to say, in Mozambique, or in South Africa, in Cape Town, I worked with a man called John de Grucci, who was a visitor to St. Andrews a number of years ago and received an honorary doctorate at Knox College. And John, again, was a very influential person in my life. His work on Dietrich Bonhoeffer was really is really critical, and also John was very much a part of the church's role in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa and understanding how the church would engage in it. So I worked back and forth, and eventually left the forum and then joined another ecumenical organization called the Church's Council on Theological Education in Canada. As ecumenical groups became smaller, their names became longer. I think that was some
and the
kind
acronyms,
of compensation. Yeah, that's right. So at the Church's Council on Theological Education, I was involved with ecumenical initiatives in theological education in Canada, and again working with, in that case, 6 different Canadian denominations, and we did some very interesting work, including work with the Canadian Theological Students Association, who had an annual conference. I think you were a delegate one year. And some very interesting work towards the end of that on theology and Indigenous spirituality and the whole relationship with Indigenous people and the churches in Canada. And it was from there in 2011 that I accepted a call to be the associate minister at St. Andrews. So I kind of went in a different direction than many people do, in that most of my congregational experience has been from later in my life and in my ministry, but I've really appreciated the opportunity to be in parish ministry and congregational ministry, and especially with the good folks at St. Andrews, and the openness of the congregation in so many ways to inclusion of all kinds of people, and in engaging with the community in which we're located in downtown Toronto. So I was able to bring, many of my own life experiences into this ministry at St. Andrews, but also to benefit so much from the gifts and the work of and witness of people in St. Andrews Church.
Special place, indeed. Yeah. It's a huge and fascinating career, just in work with youth and global missions and Indigenous folks and all that kind of stuff. What and ecumenically as well. What do you see as the big issues facing the General Assembly? That you can bring some of that long experience to?
Well, I think one of the most important issues that continues to be before our church as a national church and also as a local church, but certainly at a national level, is truth-telling and a movement toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Our church was involved in the residential schools, and although we've offered a confession in the 1990s over what happened in residential schools, we continue to have to work with and walk with Indigenous people to know how we heal from that, both Indigenous people and settlers who, and I think that's an important piece that we still really have to work at as a national church and as Christians in Canada, that the settler community needs healing as well. And I think we're afraid of our wounds in many ways.
Yeah.
and afraid to acknowledge them, and of course the woundedness as well of Indigenous people that needs healing. And the events of the past year or so of the I'll say discovery of graves, although Indigenous people have been saying this for years and years, that there were many graves of children that were located around the residential schools. But that's emphasized again the significance of what's happened with the residential schools and in the relationship of the churches and Indigenous people in Canada. So that continues to be before us, and in my mind, what is one of the most important things before the church and before the General Assembly. And I think we'll find that this year as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, we're going to continue to live out the decisions that were taken last year around inclusion of LGBTQI people in the church, both the recommendations of the Rainbow Communion, and I was the co-convener of the Rainbow Communion, and then also the approval of two what are called remits that had been before the church for a couple of years, that allow for same-sex marriage within the church, and that allow for people in same-sex relationships to be ordained as ministers and elders and to participate in all levels of leadership in the church. And that's, of course, been the big topic of discussion over the last several years. And I think it will continue to be, as differing views are still there. They haven't disappeared. So we need to work out the implications of that going forward. So I think those issues, as they have been for many years, will be significant. And also, you know, I think it may not be a specific report or specific recommendations, but we, like other historic churches in Canada, are dealing with what it means to be a much smaller organization with less influence, perhaps, or less place within the broader Canadian society, and how we maintain relationships on a national level. And that's where, at the General Assembly, it's of particular concern, how we maintain a national body with less resources, less people. But in my mind, that's part of the work of the Assembly as well, in discerning who we're going to be, what we're going to be, what the church is going to look like, and the decisions that are made at the Assembly, as in presbyteries and sessions and whatever throughout the country, are decisions that will shape the church into the future. And so whether we're looking at issues around budget or staffing at the national office, or where our emphasis is going to be in relation to justice issues that may or may not be to people's liking, or whether they think the church should be involved in some particular concerns of justice in the country and the world. And, you know, then, of course, we also are going to be engaged in the huge global issues that confront all of us. So what about climate change? What does the church say? What does the church do? How does it respond from its biblical and theological bases, but also in terms of its actions and its what it says to government, for example.
Yeah.
And also how we come to terms with what we've been experiencing for the last 2 years in the pandemic, how we emerge from that as a church and as a Canadian society, as a global society. What lessons have we learned? How will that be reflected in what we talk about and what we decide in the General Assembly and in the reports that come before us?
Yeah. On that then, just as a segue, your role doesn't end at the end of the General Assembly this year. What are some of the things that you're going to want to focus on as the year sort of unfolds through 2022 and 2023?
Yes, and that's something I want people at St. Andrews to be aware of, that the role does continue as a kind of representative of the church. We don't have bishops, we don't have cardinals or popes.
We don't have to call you Pope Bob.
No, you don't. And in fact, there's no particular power that goes along with it to change anything or to make new regulations or laws or doctrine or whatever.
But we'll try.
But I can try. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
But the moderator becomes really a representative of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And so I know there is a gathering every year of Canadian church leaders. So I would be a part of that. That's hosted by the Canadian Council of Churches. There are invitations to speak in different churches and in different locations, and then attendance at some other gatherings that might be of national importance where the church wants a presence. There's also
just on that, and it might be interesting for the people of the congregation particularly to know that George Vise, when he was the moderator, was the moderator who actually offered the apology or the confession
in Winnipeg, 1994,
to the Indigenous people about the residential schools back in 1994,
I think it was.
So it's an important role to
yes. And the moderator is also ex officio member of all committees of the General Assembly.
In good Presbyterian fashion.
Yes. So you're able, if you want, to attend every single meeting of every single committee,
which I'm sure you'll want to do. Actually,
I might not get to all of them, but I think it is important, in my experience as being convener of a number of different committees within the National Church. It is important that the moderator be present from time to time and be able to engage in the conversation and know what the committees are talking about, so that if you're representing the church somewhere, you can speak knowledgeably about what's being discussed.
Good. To that end, that leads us nicely then. In what ways can the St. Andrews community be supportive to you in the next year?
Well, I hope that you will all hold me in your prayers. That's extremely important as I take on this role. It is a bit daunting, I must say, to think about it, and to so hold me in prayer, and also realize I won't be around as much as I have been, and we're looking at ways that maybe that can be compensated for a bit. But I just won't be. I will have significant time away in the duties and the role as moderator. So to allow me that time, and to know that I will also carry you and the ministry of St. Andrews with me across the country and across the world as I visit different congregations and different churches. So I cherish your prayers and your thoughts and your support for me in that way. It is, I must say, it's a bit historic in that I'm the first openly gay man to be the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and I expect that that will come with its own challenges and tensions and conversations as I engage with people. It's sort of not up for debate at this point, but this is something new, and I hope that in being in this role, I can be in conversation with people who may have differing views around inclusion and to assure people that inclusion is something that simply recognizes the humanity and the gifts of everyone. Mm-hmm. And how important that is, but it's not going to be easy. So I really do cherish prayers and support as I embark on that journey as well.
So one final question: what keeps you in the church? What do you love about the church? What you obviously have given your life to it? What is church to you?
Well, I'll just preface that by saying there have been many moments through that journey that I had significant doubts about staying in the church. Mm-hmm. And part of that was related to the fact that I'm gay, and the church's lack of inclusion has been very difficult. Mm-hmm. I had an experience, I think I talked about this in a sermon once, where I was really ready to leave. I was really fed up and hurt, Mm-hmm. And I was at my parents' home, which was at Woodland Beach at that time, and went out for a walk, and it was kind of like a winter's night, like we've been experiencing in the last few days. So it was snowing, and I kind of went very deep into myself, and there was a bit of a mantra that came to me that God is love, and love is God, and that just continued as I was walking, and that helped me a great deal to focus on where it was that my calling came from, to be a minister, to be involved in leadership in the church, and that goes beyond the church. It goes beyond our humanness and our attempts to worship God and to show love in the world. We try, and sometimes we fail, and sometimes we don't quite get it right. But that's at the heart of who we are as people of faith, I think. And if I keep that before me, and that as the heart of who I am and what my calling is in the world, that gives me strength and hope and courage to be engaged in this way in God's calling in the world. I think that's there for everyone. I think whenever we're discouraged or wondering why things are the way they are, or why we're in the place that we're in, that very deep sense of God, the God who is love and who came among us and continues to come among us, can bring that courage and that ability to respond that all of us need.
Good. Well, thank you for this, and God bless you. We're so thrilled to celebrate this with you, and we'll definitely be keeping you in our prayers and supporting you through this whole thing, because it's a wonderful opportunity, not only for you but also for all of us to learn more about the church and to really experience that in the fullness of it. So
I hope that will be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Yes. Well, God bless you, and we will talk to you soon.
And St. Andrews. Bye for now.